can't remember the guest that I had this conversation with, but it was super interesting. We looked into the average retention time on a mobile phone. So if you go on your phone and you're on, like, let's say Instagram or whatever, it would count as average retention. So the average retention in America, which I'm guessing would be similar in the UK, is about 7 hours a day,
Wow.
right? Firstly, that's so odd because that's a huge number. But secondly, if you think of how long you're on social media, so let's say you're on social media for 3 hours of that 7, you are being targeted by ads based on your insecurities. Now, this is a huge thing when it comes to Botox, fillers for guys, hair transplants, all this kind of stuff. So if you're being shown ads every day for years, for 3 hours a day, eventually that's going to stick. And I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I don't believe there's any restrictions in advertising Ozempic.
It depends how it's marketed, I suspect, actually. So if it's as a medical aid, then possibly not. I mean, ironically, there are lots of restrictions for us if we want to talk about eating disorders and treatment. So, we'll run into lots of issues with sort of Meta and, if we want to kind of put sort of information out to sort of say we exist and this is what we're doing. But interestingly to that point, so I have a very bizarre, as you probably do, quite bizarre feeds on my social media because I look at all sorts of things and I often think, if someone looks at this, they're going to be like, geez, this woman's got issues. But, I get constant information, a woman in my late 40s, constantly being bombarded with weight loss, gummies for menopause, and consistently now, you can buy your weight loss medication from us, quick and easy, here's a discount, etc. One of the things that's been really, really alarming is that I have been buying this medication and I now get constant emails offering me discounts to keep purchasing the medication. And with one particular supplier, I go back on every 4 to 8 weeks. And I've actually done a couple of things with a couple of journalists around this, which is why I'm really quite passionate about this. And I will go on and I will put exactly the same information back in again. So it's fraud, but I've falsified my weight and my condition, etc. And I put exactly the same information every time. And I've been doing this now for probably nearly a year. And they just send me the medication again. So nothing's changed. Nobody said, this is the 8th time you've ordered this medication. And, it's exactly, and I think this is to your point of following the money, nobody's sitting there worrying about this. Now, my concern is when I have these 16, 17, actually the youngest I've had is 15-year-olds coming into treatment, buying this medication online, taking it into school or college. I've spoken to boarding house mistresses who say to me they find the little, I don't know if you've ever seen a Ozempic pen, but they have these little needles that screw on the top. They're finding them, in common rooms, in schools or in dorm rooms, in, boarding schools. The kids are sharing the needles. They're working out how to dismantle the pens. They're taking out the liquid. They're buying the individual components. They're mixing it up themselves because it's cheaper. Suddenly you go, oh dear, this is, the kind of whole oxy crisis that hit the US. I kind of see it a little bit on that scale because we have no idea how many people are using it currently. That's what's worrying me.
And it's been privatized. I think that's worse because
Absolutely.
There's a clear motive, and you have people. The business that I'm in jewelry, it's very emotionally driven, and it's not immoral. Everyone needs to make a profit, but when you get to preying on people's insecurities, that's immoral. Yeah. And there's companies at the moment, startups that were made maybe 2 or 3 years ago that are now worth millions. And they've grown that fast because they're preying on the insecurity of people that are overweight.
Yeah.
And I just don't know. I really do think, and I'm not sure what the kind of legislation is around advertising and what the government's putting into place, but they always seem to be 10 years behind what's happening. And as a result, you get these issues that they can't catch fast and people do get addicted to. I mean, vapes. They said that they would ban disposable vapes. So what the disposable vape company did is they put a little charging port in the back, even though they know it's still a disposable vape, and they're still available. So they said they banned vapes, they didn't. And as a result, you have these school children that are 12, 13, 14 years old digesting and consuming something that is created in a lab in China that nobody knows what it actually does.
Yeah. Yeah. It yeah. And the difficulty is, I think, going back to the fact that they are, whether it's a vape, which gives you some kind of hit or something, I don't know, but with GLP-1s, they work. They are
Mm.
really, really effective. So on the one hand, they are a very effective medication. We haven't got huge amounts of sort of longitudinal data against them yet, but they are making they do exactly what they say on the tin. And I'm watching this happen. And, I do worry a lot about the kind of psychological impact of this more broadly on society and what this is saying. But I also worry about the factually, like, what is happening to your hormones, the level of disruption, what's happening to your heart, your digestion, your bone density, your immune system. I'm seeing
Mm.
people who have got terrible fatigue, they're dizzy, they're sort of one person I spoke to said, oh, 1 minute I'm hot, 1 minute I'm really cold. I don't really know what's going on. I've lost a bit of hair. My skin's gone a bit weird. Are you going to stop taking it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So it's becoming
Okay.
an addiction, really.
I think it is, yeah. And it's a really interesting world for us because it sits between the world of addiction and eating disorder. And we're having to really kind of go, right, we need to get educated. We need to be thinking very differently about this. But in the same way that somebody with an eating disorder who's purging, for example, who's making themselves sick or using laxatives, it feels like it's a very sort of similar process that's happening. But we're educating people into how to do that. I mean, we've been teaching people how to lose weight forever. You look at,
Mm.
again, I don't want to sort of speak ill of these organizations because I know they've helped people, but the Slimming Worlds and the, Weight Watchers, you read their how to. I mean, it's kind of like how to be anorexic kind of guide, and a bit of shaming with the public standing on a scales and everyone going, oh, you didn't lose very much this week. And, oh, you did lose weight, you get a star. It's we've been doing it for a long time, but I am really concerned about where this goes, actually, because we are seeing people coming in with, perhaps have lived in larger bodies, now living in more normative bodies, whatever that means, who have got malnutrition. They can't make decisions because their decision making has gone offline. They're really emotionally dysregulated and they're sort of feeling tremendously at a loss, and they're quite depressed and they're quite suicidal because we just took away food, which was what they were using to manage their lives with.
Where do you see this going? I mean, like, let's say there's no regulation that gets brought into place, and we're 5 years down the line, and we're having another podcast. Where do you see it going?
Well, I think we'll have a lot of thin people around. Genuinely, I think we will see bodies continuing to shrink. I think we will see huge numbers in increases in the demand for mental health services because we are not addressing the fundamental reason for not everybody, but for a number of people who live in larger bodies and are dissatisfied by that. There's a reason why that is happening, why that relationship with food exists in that particular way. And if you take that away, what are you going to do instead?
Mm.
It's like you were talking about earlier. You stop the restricting and you do a Ironman or a High Rocks. Well, that's great, but a lot of people are not going to do that. So where are they going to go instead? Are they going to be vaping or using other types of drugs? Are they going to start self-medicating? Or you're not dealing. Nobody's dealing, and that's where I think we've got a big problem, really. Yeah, and I don't know where it goes.
What is the first step that someone can take? I mean, like, if I was to identify that I had some kind of eating disorder, whether it be, eating too much or too little, what is the first step that I can take to try and, someone that might be listening to this might have the inkling that something could be wrong. What is the first step that they could take to being, and I don't want to say more healthy, but being more ease with what's actually happening inside of them?
I mean, if somebody actually starts to have that realization for themselves, it's a really positive place to be. The difficulty with eating disorders is often that doesn't happen because you've found the solution to your problem. So it's often
Mm.
somebody else looking on who says, I'm worried about you, or is starting to think, oh, this doesn't look okay. When people finally are able to talk about the fact that something isn't quite right, they usually have known for a long time, which is interesting. They felt something's off, and I encourage people at that point. Some people like to write, some people like to draw, some people like to talk, but to find a space where you can communicate like what's going on, and we can kind of, we can connect to it's, like you say, oh, I'm not eating enough, or I'm eating too much, or my body's changed and I'm feeling something about that. In my experience, people who are losing weight very rarely see that as a problem. People who
Yeah.
are, they feel their bodies are getting bigger, they're gaining weight, they see that as a problem. So they're more likely to reach out and say, this isn't okay. Because, of course, if you're losing weight, you'll get everybody telling you, oh, you look great, and what are you up to? And so you get a lot of positive reinforcement. I think it's about having it's internal sort of dialogue. And again, I go back to, I think we really do need to help to educate people more broadly to kind of understand what good feels like for them, because it's so personal. How me feeling good and balanced will be different to how you feel good and balanced in your body. That's just because we're two different people, different genders, all of that stuff. But I think the first thing I always say to people is, if you've got that little niggle of a worry, there are places you can reach out to. You can reach out to people like Beat, who are an eating disorder charity, or you can reach out to people like us. But you might not see that as the problem yet. Usually the problem is, I'm in a relationship that I'm not happy in, or I've got discomfort at work, or I'm worried about exams, or I've fallen out with a friend, or I'm struggling with something that's happening to me and I don't know how to make sense of it. I'm frightened, I'm fearful. It's usually that you start to talk about first. And through that experience, you kind of maybe start to recognize that there's this other issue occurring.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, please do me a huge favor before you go and head over to our Into the Mind podcast official page, where we have the raw, uncut Into the Mind podcast, and hit that subscribe button. And the more subscribers we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the show. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all real soon.